are in the Zoom meeting now. There are 2 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Hey. Can you hear me?
Hey, what's happening? Yeah, I can hear you.
Doing
How's it going?
good. Pretty well. Just
Wait.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool. Awesome. So I think maybe it might just be the 2 of us. I don't know.
Yeah, I know Chris is gonna hop on at some point.
Cool.
He's the only one that I know for sure was planning to attend other than me.
Well, shall we go ahead and get started?
That would be fantastic, my friend.
Okay. I was just grab like a random document to take notes on, but if you have a doc that you already started, let me know.
Yeah, I'm looking.
And you're cool with recording and broadcasting and having this be, you know, public documentation?
I personally have no problem with that.
Cool. We can ask Chris when he gets on, but the main issue is just, you know, the goal is to have more documentation of community equity so people can learn more about it.
Yeah. I hear that.
Cool. So we can check in a little bit more if you want to, but other than that, I was going to go through through an overview, and then go through you know, the reset goals and just, you know, just the percentage and then the structure, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll just go through it step by step.
Okay, that sounds good.
Awesome. So was there any other check-in you wanted to do on how you were doing?
I'm pretty good. A little bit exhausted at the moment, but other than that, things are going good.
From like traveling and such?
Yeah, that, and I just I've been taking a couple days off of caffeine to give my body a little reset. So
That's good.
I do normally do caffeine.
Wow. Yeah, I don't do caffeine. I drink lots of water though. Water is very good.
Yeah, that's all I really drink is mostly water, but I also drink coffee.
Nice. Some people drink lots of Coke and sugar water. So
yeah, no, I don't mess with that.
There we go. That's better. Cool. All right. So the first thing I was going to show off here real quick is the website, and just kind of go over overview of community equity. So, you know, I put the website together. It's not perfect, but I think it looks really, you know, good. It's definitely presentable. So this is communityequity.net, and you know, basically you have your about. Eventually we'll have all the tutorials there, which may eventually include this video. We do our updates, our services, because we can offer services, and then obviously contact and all the other, you know, details, sponsorship and things like that. So I mean, the basic of, you know, community equity being a socially responsible business ownership model is simply saying that, you know, the old model of a business was, and you know, to a certain extent still is, you know, that you have owners and investors and that it's their business and then everyone else is left out. And so the whole concept of community equity at a foundational basis is the idea that a business is not, you know, owned by the owners and is just like somebody else's. The business is the community of all the people and contributions that go into building that business. That's the foundational definition of what a business is, that it's the community around the entire thing. And that's why it's, you know, community equity, to create a new business ownership model. So from there, the actual process is very simple. You're talking about, you know, every single community member who's involved in any way to contribute towards the business is you know, given quantitative equity based on the amount of time they put in, or money, or some other type of quantitative support that's trackable. So that's pretty much the basics of community equity. I think we've gone over this before, but I just wanted to make sure we refreshed ourselves. Do you have any questions on like the overall purpose and like what community equity is?
I think I'm in a pretty good, I have a pretty good basic understanding, as you said, many of the conversations we've had before. So I think I'm comfortable at this point.
Cool. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, so I feel like that's the closest example of community equity in this particular situation would be corporate stock options in a company. So it's good to think about that in relationship to what actually currently exists as a regular system of organizing. Oh wait, there's one other thing I want to do. Merge goals. Okay. All right. So so we went over the overview of community equity, which is good. The next step would be basically talking about the reset goals. Oh, what are you looking for? Keys? I have my keys. No, my keys? No. So the overall reset goals would be good to mention in the context that, you know, reset is a perfect model for what you guys are wanting to do for implementing community equity, you know?
Yeah, definitely. So it's our goal to build our reset media network with a portion of equity available for communities as community equity for any member that join reset in the reset network. Not sure if you can hear me because I know you're doing some things over there.
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, up to this point, we've talked with you as well as Ben and a few other team members on how we might be able to facilitate distributing community equity to each member that joins reset. That's kind of that's the basic goal that we have.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, overall, in my words, when I hear it, I think, you know, the goal is building some type of community-owned media company or business collective, right? So that's what I'm hearing you guys want to do. So the question is, how do we structure it in a way that actually, you know, is both legal and also collaborative, so that everybody's getting their fair share. So, so that sound about right?
Yeah.
Great. So we're just gonna go through like step by step here, as it would be within a company. And I know it's just you, and you aren't the company. I mean, you have a board, and you have your partners, and all that kind of stuff. And when we get Chris here, we'll have at least one other person perspective.
Yeah.
But I still think it's really important to understand the simplicity of community equity, and that if you don't just do it, it's very complicated because you can talk about it and spin your wheels and go around infinite times. But when you just do it, it's really pretty simple. So the way I like to structure the, you know, process of actually implementing it is to literally actually implement it in, like, you know, a mock way. I mean, obviously, you guys would have to make a final decision with whatever decision-making model you had for your organization and business. But anyway, so the first question, which is very simple, is obviously if you want to implement community equity at all in the first place, and I think we're done with that. There's pretty much agreement that people want to move forward with that. So that's the first step. The second step would be the percentage. So the easiest way to do a simple community equity model is simply just choose a percentage, and then you're pretty much ready to move forward. So let's go into the current, you know, I mean, basically currently reset hasn't necessarily been created. I mean, I guess right now it's 100% subsidiary of Give Life to Art, correct? In many ways?
Correct.
Yeah. So in that context, we could basically just say, all right, of this 100% that's currently owned by Give Life to Art, what percentage of it would we want to go to community equity?
Yep. So the latest conversation we had as the partnership and as a board was 30%.
30%. Cool. So that would be 30% community equity. And then you have 70% Give Life to Art partners. All right. So in that context, I don't know if you have the other document set up. I might be able to just share this doc with you that I'm writing in.
That would be cool. I know that you passed along one
reaction
to us a while ago.
Is it .org? Reactionfoundry.org?
.com.
Oh, no. All right, let's see if that works. Yeah, it looks like it's gonna work. Cool. So so that's pretty much what we have to work with. The next question is, well, let's just leave it simple, right? So that's the simplest way to do it, is that basically now we have, 30% community equity, which equals 100% of the community equity. So the easiest way is basically to do that. The next question, and the cool thing about community equity, and this is actually really important, is that once you actually decide to do this, this is a simple proposal. The proposal would be, proposal, to implement 30% community equity for Reset. You could add in like media company or whatever, right? Or Reset overall. Yeah. So the proposal itself is extremely simple. Once you propose that and you have agreement or consensus onto it, basically what you're saying is that you're reducing the ownership of the Give Life to Art partners by a third, pretty much, right? But yeah, the Give Life to Art partners and the individuals involved and the companies involved will also get community equity. So it's not technically a direct reduction of a third. It's just a reduction of direct ownership being a third. Okay?
Yeah, that's a good point to make it clear.
So then the next step is, so once you do that and you basically decide to implement this 30% community equity, what you end up with is the what's called the placeholder, and we'll go over this in detail as needed. It becomes the company itself, right? So a company can say that it's going to implement 30% community equity, right? And then that can instantaneously happen based on the decision to do it. And then the company itself, in essence, automatically owns that equity. Right? So it becomes the placeholder. It's overseeing it, like with this simple proposal of 30% of the community equity going to a separate beneficiary group. The placeholder can be anybody. So you automatically, without any other component of the proposal, the placeholder automatically becomes the company itself. So let's go over the idea of a placeholder. Have you heard that concept yet, or should I go over it in more detail, or what?
I think it would be good for myself if you went over that.
So basically, the community equity placeholder is the actual organization or owner of the community equity that holds it in what's basically the process of a trustee that holds it in benefit to the community of the company. Does that sort of make sense? And you can choose anybody as a placeholder. So a placeholder is the actual, quote, owner of the equity or stock. It can be also stock. And they are, in essence, the trustee that holds the equity in trust on behalf of the community or beneficiaries. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the easiest way to understand this is that, well, first of all, that it's extremely flexible. You can choose any individual, any organization can be the placeholder of the community equity. And so one of the options that are very favorable to people is using a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Right? So this is a public charity. What's interesting about a public charity is that a public charity is structured automatically as a trust. It is just a public trust. So it's a public trust. So instead of the beneficiaries being private individuals, the beneficiaries of the trust is the public. For example, an environmental, 501c3 nonprofit. The beneficiary, in essence, is the environment, and it's the entire public. And so the actual organization is holding the assets of the nonprofit charity in benefit and on behalf of the environment and the public. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense.
So basically, your options are start with, let's just put this in bullet points because there's no like first or best or any particular order. So it starts with just the company itself, the company and board itself, board/decision makers. And this is a bad model because it's basically putting the fox in charge of the hen house, right?
Indeed.
So,
Indeed.
but at the same time, it's better to do that than to not do it at all, right? So as the first step, if an organization is ready to move forward with community equity, but they're not sure who or what organization they want to be the placeholder, you can still instantaneously implement community equity, have the equity set aside for the community, but wait on who and how it's going to be overseen, and just oversee it yourself. Because the board always has a role in the community equity no matter what. That never changes. So the next is obviously an individual. You can have an individual or you can have an organization. It could be any organization, any. And then you can have 501c3 nonprofit. And then lastly, you can have a trust. So do you want me to go through the basic concept of a trust and what it is? Because community equity in every aspect of what and how it functions is literally a trust. And so if people don't really understand what a trust is, then it's good to go over that again.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so a trust is simply a model. It's actually a legal model, not an organizational model, where you have a separation of ownership and assets from the actual oversight and legal decision-making of the assets themselves, right? That's pretty much what a trust is. So an example of what isn't a trust would be a for-profit corporation or company. And the reason why it's not a trust is because the people who give the money to the company end up owning it. And so then they own the company, and then the benefits of the profits go right back to the owners. So there's no division between the ownership of the assets, the money that's given, and the beneficiaries who get the money from it. So that's the example of the opposite of a trust, right? There's no division. So a trust is where you have, typically, there's a minimum of 3 components to a trust, right? So I'll start with 3, but technically you have up to 5 components. And we can go over all 5 if you want to. But the 3 main components are very simple. You have one, the donor, right? The donor or investor, et cetera, et cetera. So in a normal business, you would have an investor. The investor gives the money into the company. So typically this is be a donor. And they give the money. Give the money or assets to the trust. The second is the trustee. And this is the placeholder. right, in essence. And the trustee is the person, actually I'm going to put the placeholder as in quotes because the placeholder is a simplified example of that. So the trustee itself oversees the administration of the assets. Okay, so they don't own the assets themselves. They are simply overseeing and doing the decision making. So this is the decision making. And then the third component is the beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries are the ones who receive the benefits of the assets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in this context, the beneficiaries are the community, right? So the community, this would be the community of people around the business. Cool. And the donors and investors in this situation would also be the community because they are, donating time and energy and resources to the. So that's a very simplified version of a trust, but overall trusts are pretty simple. The key thing that you need to understand about a trust, which is different than an organization, is that this is a legal contract between a donor, a trustee, and a beneficiary, right? So you can create a trust without an organization, right? A trust exists as a contract. It's a legal contract. It's not an organization. There's no such thing as an organizational model of a trust, but many times you create a separate legal entity that is, in essence, the trust entity, even though you still have separate components that are not that single entity. So by definition, a trust is always a multi-organizational entity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Actually, it's more like a multi-organizational complex because each component of the trust has separate decision making. Cool. So I think that pretty much gives the basic of a trust. So from here, the question would be, what would you like to see for your community equity and how it's going to be, overseen, like the placeholder?
Gotcha. So that's something I think we've talked about on our team. I don't know that a decision has been made, so I need to review these options.
But right now, the goal would be just to choose one. And obviously what we already have, if we've already decided that 30% community equity is going to go and happen, you already have the base point where at least you could have the company and the board itself be the placeholder to start with, if that's where you want to start. But you can also look at some of these other options of a separate individual organization, nonprofit, or trust.
Yeah. And I think that, as you said, my understanding is once we move forward with that decision to have a percentage of the equity be community equity, that we become the placeholder, right?
Yeah, but you can always make a proposal that includes both. So you can propose 30% community equity with X organization or individual being the placeholder at the same time, right? But the key is that you want to actively acknowledge how the community equity is going to be dealt with, because that helps in understanding the implementation of the community equity. So let's just back up one little step, and then we'll get back into this. The other simple thing that I mentioned before, but I'll mention it again, is that once you implement community equity, there's no need to distribute the equity itself, right? So I'm going to write this down to make sure it's as clear as possible. And I need to get my plug. So the first process, so let's go through the process steps. So one, we didn't write these down, we just talked about them. So
yeah, I have some notes on mine.
Yeah, so step one was deciding deciding to implement community equity in the first place. Because if you don't even want to do it, then obviously there's no need to do that. Step 2 was choosing a percentage, can always be changed. And I'm going to mention that, increasing is always easier than decreasing. So in the case that the company wants to decrease the amount of community equity, for example, completely get rid of it in the future, you can always do that, but you do basically need to buy out the value of that community equity when the company takes it back, just like any other company stock purchase. Okay, so the next step from there was choosing a placeholder. And then I guess the easiest way to put step 4 is basically, wait, chill, no worries. Like that's pretty much all you got to do to get it set up. So this is like, there's only 3 steps to setting it up, but then in the future, you're going to want to be tracking, wait, this is, I'll put here, set up, done. So then you want to track tracking. So tracking would be, time in value-based contributions.
Can I ask a question?
Of course. Wait, hold on one sec.
Oh,